Somewhere in a drawer, or buried 3,000 photos deep in a phone's camera roll, there is a picture of you before you were you. 2 years old, maybe 3, grinning at a camera you don't remember facing, in a room you couldn't identify if your life depended on it. Somebody else picked out that outfit. Somebody else chose the exact moment to press the shutter. Someone in your family loves to tell the story behind that picture. They tell it every single holiday, almost word for word, like a ritual nobody agreed to start. They swear you laughed so hard that day you got hiccups, or you said something so blunt the whole table went silent, or you did something reckless enough that your mother's hands still tighten a little whenever she gets to that part. You nod along. You laugh in all the right places. But some quiet part of you knows the truth sitting underneath the whole performance. You don't remember any of it. Not a flash, not a smell, not one single frame. It's a strange kind of fame, being the main character in a story you have zero memory of starring in. So who exactly is the child in that photograph? And why does your own brain treat them like a stranger who just happens to be wearing your face? Here's the part that should feel a lot stranger than it does, mostly because it happens to literally everyone, which is exactly why nobody stops to question it. For the first 3, 4, sometimes 5 years of your life, your brain was switched on. Alert, watching, absorbing information faster than it would at any other point in your entire life, and it kept almost none of it. Scientists have a clinical name for this gap: infantile amnesia. Not amnesia in the dramatic movie sense, where a character wakes up with no idea who they are. Just the quiet, near-total disappearance of memories from your earliest years. Years that, by every measure of how awake and aware you actually were, should have left something behind. Sigmund Freud noticed this gap over a century ago and gave it its name. His explanation, that children deliberately bury those early memories to hide some deep inner conflict, hasn't held up well under modern research. The real explanation is stranger than repression and far less personal. It has nothing to do with hiding secrets from yourself. It has to do with construction work happening inside your skull on a deadline nobody consulted you about. Here's what most people quietly assume, and it turns out to be wrong: that babies simply can't form memories at all, that their brains are too blank, too undercooked. In the 1980s, a developmental psychologist named Rovee-Collier tested that assumption using something almost too simple to take seriously. A mobile hung above a crib, tied by a ribbon to a baby's ankle. Kick your foot, the mobile spins. Infants only a couple of months old figured out that connection within minutes. Then, weeks later, researchers hung that exact same mobile above the crib again, minus the ribbon this time. What happened? The babies kicked immediately, before the mobile even moved an inch, clearly expecting the same result as before. The memory of kicking making it spin had survived for weeks, stored inside a brain that supposedly couldn't hold on to anything. Even stranger, when researchers gave the babies a brief reminder first, just a glimpse of the mobile spinning on its own, memories that seemed to have vanished completely came rushing back, as if they had never really left, just gone quiet for a while. So the old assumption collapses completely. That single finding rewrote decades of thinking about what an infant's mind is actually capable of holding on to. Infants do form real memories, tested and repeated under controlled conditions. Something else later is what makes those memories disappear. That something else lives in a part of your brain called the hippocampus, a small curved structure buried deep in your temporal lobe. Think of it as your brain's filing clerk, the part responsible for taking a raw, messy experience and converting it into a memory you can pull back out later, on demand. In infancy, that filing clerk hasn't finished being built yet. Patricia Bauer, a psychologist who has spent decades studying how memory develops in young children, has shown that the hippocampus and the circuitry feeding into it mature on a long, slow timeline, one that stretches well past your earliest years and deep into childhood. A 2-year-old's brain isn't a smaller, dimmer copy of an adult brain. It's a live construction site, mid-build, while you're standing inside it trying to have a childhood at the same time. Is it really any wonder the filing system loses most of what comes through the door? It's also part of why your actual earliest memory, if you can locate one at all, almost never comes from being 2 years old. It tends to surface closer to 4 or 5 once that particular construction project has finally caught up. But an unfinished filing cabinet doesn't fully explain why memories vanish instead of just sitting around, disorganized but intact. For that, the story gets even stranger, and it comes from a source nobody would guess: mice. In 2014, a neuroscientist named Paul Franklin, working with colleagues at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto, published a study that flipped the entire question upside down. His team focused on neurogenesis, the birth of brand new brain cells from scratch. Adult brains produce very few of these. Infant brains produce them at an explosive, almost reckless rate, especially inside the hippocampus. And that flood of new cells doesn't just add extra storage space. It actively rewires the connections already in use to make room for itself, sometimes knocking loose the memories that were already filed there. When Franklin's team sped up neurogenesis in young mice, old memories vanished even faster than usual. When they slowed it down instead, the memories stuck around far longer than expected. The very thing that makes an infant brain so remarkably good at learning anything at record speed appears to be the same thing quietly erasing the record of how it got there. What does that suggest about your own earliest memories? Maybe they weren't lost because your brain failed to save them. Maybe they were lost because your brain was growing too fast, too aggressively, to leave anything sitting still. Sit with that for a second, because it reframes the whole problem. The forgetting might not be a glitch at all. It might be the price of admission for early learning. Think about everything your brain was quietly building during those exact same forgotten years. It learned to recognize faces from across a room. It learned that your mother still existed even after she walked out of it, a concept researchers call object permanence, one your brain had to construct completely from scratch through trial and error. It learned to walk, which meant rewriting its entire relationship with balance, gravity, and space. It absorbed the grammar of an entire language faster than it will ever manage again as an adult, no classroom required. It learned which foods were safe and which situations called for caution by watching the faces around your family's table, absorbing entire libraries of unspoken rules without ever sitting through a single lesson. All of that had to be built, tested, and rebuilt at a genuinely punishing pace. So would you trade a crisp, intact memory of your third birthday party for the ability to absorb your entire native language in 18 months flat? Look around you right now. You already made that trade. Nobody asked for your permission first. And here's the twist hiding inside the twist. Some researchers now think those early memories aren't erased so much as locked, saved in a format your adult brain can no longer open. Nora Newcomb, a cognitive psychologist who studies memory development in children, has pointed out that very young kids can show clear behavioral evidence of remembering something, reacting to a place or a person in a way that only makes sense if they recognize it, even though they will never be able to turn that memory into a spoken story later on. A toddler startled by a dog at 18 months might flinch around dogs years later with no conscious idea why, the feeling outliving the story that created it. What if the circuitry that stores an early memory and the circuitry that later retrieves it as words are simply running different software entirely? The experience could still be sitting in there somewhere, fully intact. Your adult brain may have just lost the one key that opens that particular drawer, which brings you back to the photograph. The story about the laughing fit, the hiccups, the reckless afternoon. That was never actually your memory. It was always hers. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you a little, if you let it. Almost everything you believe about yourself before the age of 4 or 5 was built the exact same secondhand way, stitched together from photographs, home videos, and stories repeated at enough holidays that they eventually started to feel like real recollection. Your earliest sense of who you were isn't something you actually remember. It's something you were told over and over until it quietly hardened into fact. Ask 3 different relatives about the very same early childhood memory, and you'll often get 3 different versions, each one delivered with total confidence, each one quietly rewritten by years of retelling. So where exactly is the line between who you truly were as a toddler and who you were simply informed you were, years later, by people who loved you? It doesn't stop mattering once childhood technically ends either. Your brain never fully retired this trade-off between growth and memory. Every time you throw yourself into something demanding as an adult, a new language, a new city, on a skill intense enough to genuinely rewire how you move or think, you're asking your brain to run a smaller, quieter version of what it was doing constantly back at age 2. Start a demanding new job, move to an unfamiliar city, or become a parent for the first time, and watch a version of that same fog roll back in. Notice what tends to happen during those stretches. People going through an intense new chapter of life routinely describe the exact same odd side effect: patchy memory for the small, forgettable details of that same period, almost as if the brain was too busy laying down new wiring to bother filing the boring parts properly. Have you ever looked back at a demanding year and realized whole months feel strangely thin, blurred, hard to place in order? The baby who forgot almost everything about being a baby wasn't broken or unusual or unlucky. It was simply doing, at full volume, something your brain still quietly does at a lower volume every time you ask it to become someone slightly new. So the next time somebody hands you a photograph of a child you don't recognize, wearing your face, laughing at a joke you'll never get to remember hearing, don't treat it like proof that something was stolen from you. Nothing was stolen. Something was spent deliberately by a brain that knew exactly what it was doing long before you had any say in the matter. It bought you a working memory system, a stable sense of space, a language good enough to describe both of them right now, in this very sentence. It bought you the version of yourself sitting here, hearing this, able to make sense of any of it at all. Somewhere underneath all of it, a 2-year-old version of you that you will never get to meet again made that trade on your behalf and never once stopped to ask if you'd have agreed to it. That picture in the drawer was never evidence of a memory you lost. It's a receipt, proof of purchase for a childhood you couldn't possibly have kept, in exchange for absolutely everything else you actually needed to become who you are right now.